the overall consensus is that we are living in a time which requires knowledge in order to succeed. Should everyone go to college? Now, one thing to keep in mind as we start thinking about this question is to look at it at two different levels, a micro and a macro level. On the one hand, you want to think about this as an individual personal decision. Should I go to college, or should my nephew or my granddaughter go to university? But you also want to think about this as a social macro level problem. So if you take all these micro decisions, should I go to college, yes or no, and you put them together, how does that impact a community? How does it impact a state or a nation or the world or an economy? So as we proceed, I want you to think about those two different levels, the big picture and the personal picture. And as we start exploring the reasons for this, I also want you to keep in mind one bit of historical perspective. The idea that a lot of people should go to college is actually very new and very recent. For centuries, and keep in mind that universities are about 1,000 years old as an invention. For centuries, going to college was just for the very wealthy, for a small group of them, in fact, as well as for a couple of fields, primarily religion and law. So for centuries, universities were pretty marginal in terms of how many people took classes. Now that began to change in the 19th century with the Industrial Revolution. And here the United States really took the lead. Starting around 1850, as a society, we realized that we're watching the rise of a whole series of new technologies and new ways of working and new ways of living, and that we needed more people to have more skills and more ideas in how to respond to that and how to work in that new world. So we started seeing more and more enrollment begin to tick up. Where it really began to take off was after World War II, because of two big developments. First, there was the GI Bill, which gave veterans the right and the capacity to take classes as a benefit, but also to help improve their lives. And then shortly after that, we had the Sputnik moment, where the United States went through a kind of national panic about falling behind in the Cold War in our technological capacity. So we threw a lot of people into colleges and universities in order to fight, that Cold War technological fight. Now, starting in the 1970s and the early 1980s, we gradually surfaced a kind of national consensus that the more people get more college experience, the better. In fact, everybody should have some higher education experience. And this idea has also percolated around the world, so that total enrollment in higher education really grew for the last part of the 20th century. So again, this is a pretty recent development. In fact, I was born in 1967. Arguably, I am older than the idea that everyone should go to college. So why should you go to college? Now, you can all think of good reasons, and I want to break some of these reasons down because each of them reveal different implications for what we assume college is and what we assume it does for people and for society as a whole. So let me start. The first one, and kind of the one that people think about the most, is that one should go to college in order to further your career. This is a kind of no-brainer in a lot of ways. We could think about professions and fields that actually require certification in order to enter. Think about law, for example. Think about healthcare again. But also, this is something that we just expect now in a lot of the economy, where people use bachelor's degrees as a way of assessing a student's success or failure. In fact, a friend of mine, economist Bryan, has a book where he argues for what he calls the sheepskin effect. That no matter how many classes you take, that doesn't matter. What matters is that sheepskin, that diploma. That's what matters for employers. We also know that this is a way for people to really expand their ability to work with other people. So in colleges and universities, students also acquire soft skills, how to work in teams, how to fit in the hierarchy, how to advocate for yourself. So in many ways, this is the kind of professional development reason. Now, it's not a perfect one. We know statistically, looking at decades of research, that there's what's called the college premium. For the median and above, people who go to college and get a degree, their lifetime earnings will go up. And that amount is actually pretty substantial. That can be in the several hundreds of thousands of dollars, which really is a net benefit given the cost of higher education. And that's pretty awesome. There are problems with this, though. First is the problem that there are some fields and some experiences which do not yield a net benefit. Second is the problem that there is a large chunk of people, maybe a third of people, who go to college, who take classes, who study university, but do not get a degree. And for them, there is no economic benefit. There's no professional development. Saying, oh, I went to this university, I studied for 7 years, I just didn't get a degree, usually counts for nothing for an employer. So we know there are some limitations and some problems. I'll come back to that in a bit. A second reason, and this is a relatively modern one, I really date to the 1960s, is that college and universities are ways that you are for self-discovery. They're ways for you to learn different things about yourself. So they might be to learn who you are. They might be to learn what you're really good at. They might be ways for you to find out how to express yourself, to find your voice. It's a kind of, not a therapeutic model, but really a self-discovery model. And this has all kinds of obvious evidence that we can find. If you talk to people who have graduated from college, you can find them sharing stories about switching majors, about when they had one class that just lit them up for what they wanted to do. Myself, when I started university in 1985, I wanted to be a Soviet studies scholar, which is now a kind of historical relic. And what I learned over 5 years was that really what I wanted to do was literature. That's what I ended up doing my PhD and becoming a professor. That learning about oneself is in many ways a very American principle, but this is one that really applies. A third reason, and it's one that we kind of celebrate and we kind of don't, is the idea that the college experience should be fun. I mean, it should be delightful. And when people think of their college experience, they often come back to that. They remember friends, they remember games, they remember parties, they remember great stories and great experiences. That college is in part a way to have not a holiday, but to have a way of sowing your wild oats, a way to get to learn how to play as an adult, and a way to discover more ways of interacting that are entertaining. And you can see this, for example, in the sorority and fraternity system. You can see this in the professional sports, the college sports system, either for people who are playing, but also for people who participate in games as spectators. And you could see it in all kinds of other areas as well, where people talk about having great parties, or they talk about just having a lot of fun with movies or amateur theater, all kinds of ways. So these three are actually very different. They have different registers, and they have different meanings. We can also take this a little further. Another reason that some universities really stress is professional networking. That is, when you go to university, you're going to meet people, and those connections may be ones that stand you in good stead for your professional life. For example, getting recommendation letters from faculty, getting to know peers who go on to do something else. This gives you a leg up in your job and in your professional life as a whole. So there's a kind of secondary curriculum, really, where you're not only learning to be a biologist, but you're also learning the networks of society. And some parts of higher education stress this more than others. Some elite universities will stress this. They'll hammer home how many famous people have graduated from their doors. You also have the Greek system, which really, really pushes this very hard, both the social Greek and professional Greek systems. Now, this is not something which really works through all of higher education. For example, most students do not live on campus as undergrads. Most students actually are commuters. And so they lack those extra hours per week to network necessarily. But that networking idea is very powerful. And then there's another dimension of the social, which is, well, mating. For a lot of people, colleges and universities are where you go to find your life partner or partners. This is where you get to hook up and find someone that you'll be spending a lot of years with later on. This is where you get the famous notorious MRS degree, for example, but it's also a very logical point. Traditional age students, 18 to 22 or so, are in that stage of life where they are making these kind of decisions. And plus, as others have argued, the sorting mechanism of going to college, of going through admissions and of sifting out all your social connections really has a good chance of leading you to that person. Now, the leading way that people mate, that people get married or form lifelong relationships today is through online, but colleges still play a key role in that. Now, all of those are individual purposes. All of those have benefits for single people or for couples, as I just mentioned. But on the social level, we all support this for other reasons as well. And the first is that the more people go to college, the better the economy gets. And the reasons for this is actually deeper than it looks. I mentioned the 19th century idea that often you go to college in order to get specific skills for technical environment. And that's still true today. There are a great deal of technical degrees where you go, you immerse yourself in a specific field of knowledge in order to go out and work in that field. And sometimes it's actually physically technical or industrial. Think about degrees in diesel engineering, for example. But we also have degrees that have a lot of technical knowledge, very precise knowledge that you absolutely have to have in order to work in that field. Think about foreign language acquisition, for example, in order to be a translator. Think again, I mentioned before, the law, how you have to really immerse yourself in legal studies in order to have a chance of passing the bar and practicing. So we have all of that. And if you put all those micro benefits together, the macro benefit is a better educated society, a society that can perform more advanced tasks. And then the economic benefits really cascade from that. For example, a lot of those jobs pay more. So you're really adding and accruing more income in the economy, which is a good thing for any society. But also, we now live in what some call the post-industrial era, some call the fourth industrial era. But the overall consensus is that we are living in a field, in a time, which requires knowledge in order to succeed. And this is partly because we live in a knowledge economy where ideas and expression matter a great deal. Partly it's because we live in a field after the Industrial Revolution where how to manage society is a big deal. But overall, we also want to try to do research and development. So it may be that you go to the university and you help develop a new tweak to AI or a new form of biotech, and you help advance the overall society. So that kind of supercharges the economy. Think of this is one of the reasons why so many policymakers, both government officials, but also people who are major stakeholders in society, captains of industry, for example, really push for more and more higher ed. And you'll see this in every country in the world. It's just considered a net benefit for society. Second, and this is one that we don't really take quite as seriously or talk as much about, but is definitely very positive, has to deal with public health. I don't mean this in the sense that we need to graduate more and more specialists in public health. Obviously, we do, as the pandemic and its course through the United States has shown. But we've seen statistically, through data after data, study after study, that the more a person has college university experience, the healthier they are. That is, they are less likely to indulge in habits that are bad for their health, such as smoking tobacco. They tend to live longer. And they also avoid some other practices, and they also are less likely to kill themselves. So overall, higher education boosts public health. It literally makes society healthier. And there's a third reason, which we considered for a long time as a kind of minor note, but after 2016, it really, really took off. And that's the idea that no matter how much you take civics in high school, no matter how much you might watch C-SPAN on cable, no matter how much you might participate in local voting groups, that kind of thing, it's not enough to really have civil society and a democratic society work. That colleges and universities goose our ability to be democratic citizens. They make us more likely to vote, more likely to donate, more likely to campaign, more likely to run for office and support campaigns as well. And it's just better for democratic society overall. So these three reasons here are really different from the individual reason, but all those individual choices add up to these benefits.